Hey, this is David Wolinsky back with another interview from the audio archives of Don't Die. This time I'm bringing to you the first half of my conversation with Adam and Rebekah Saltsman. We spoke back in September 14th, 2016. Adam and Bekah Saltzman are game developers and publishers and the co-founders of Finji Games, based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And just another reminder, if you like the work that I'm doing and you'd like to support it, that would be greatly appreciated, and you can do that over on my Patreon, which you can easily find a link near this interview. Thanks for listening, and now here's Adam and Bekah Saltzman.
You want to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. My name is Adam Saltzman, and I am 34. That's weird.
Did you just have a birthday?
Let's see. I guess my context for the game industry is that I am and have been an independent game developer for about 10 years or so now. Kind of doing a mix of original projects and contract work for different clients. Before that, I was a software developer for like a Windows-based software company, sort of medium-sized startup in Austin, Texas. And I guess my background is pretty multidisciplinary also. I was educated in animation and programming, and a self-taught 3D modeler and pixel artist, and now a self-taught quote-unquote game designer. And I guess probably I'm best known for making a Flash and mobile game called Cannibal, which sort of revitalized the endless runner, one-button action game genre on mobile. And currently we're trying to ship our publishing project, which is Night in the Woods, and our internal development project, which is a strategy game called Overland.
Cool. My name is Bekah Saltsman, and I'm 35. I married young, wrapped in the cradle. Yeah, it's true. Adam,
awesome.
Yeah, Adam and I have been together actually since we were 16 and 17. So we've been together for a really long time, and we've been married for a decade. Our anniversary was actually last summer. And
Congratulations.
Thanks. And we used to live in Austin, Texas up until June of this year, and we relocated to Grand Rapids, Michigan for a whole host of reasons. Probably one of those reasons is to be closer to family, because we do have two children, a 3.5 and 5.5-year-old. My background in the game industry is actually kind of weird, because I never thought I would be here. I went to school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the University of Michigan, for basically communication. So I was interested in public relations and media relations. And that was all of my internship work before I got sort of a real job. It was all nonprofit media relations and marketing. And then I got a job at a software company in Austin after we moved there, kind of as a glorified secretary, and eventually worked my way up through the company for several years. So I was a self-taught technical writer. I'm incredibly good at breaking software. Not because I don't know how to use it. I just I'm good at breaking and finding bugs. So technical writing was really a fun thing for me. And then I eventually became a product manager, which is at that company with a tiny bit of marketing, but mostly development. So I did a lot of sort of focus testing or communicating with our customers to figure out what kind of features they wanted and where the industry was going. It was a photography industry, so I was looking at trends in the types of computers people used and how they were using them and who was the market. This was sort of at the beginning of like moms, like mom photographers sort of taking over the industry. And then
was that coinciding with the mommy blogger?
Yes,
movement?
Actually, it was. So this is like 2005, 2006-ish.
Right.
So yeah, the mommy bloggers, like all that, and it was also the shift from Windows to Mac. That's when I was working in the photography software industry, which was really interesting. But I quit that job actually in 2008, partly for a change, partly for a whole host of other reasons, but also Adam sort of bought us some time, kind of, for me to decide what else I wanted to do with an advertising project he did, and also Wordle came out. And then I just kind of fell into the game industry. So I started taking over the finances and legal for our companies that we were running. I've sort of always been in the background, but never took a more public role in the company until, I don't know, what was it, 2014 or something? Yeah,
something like that.
When I was like, okay, I've been doing so much work and design work and everything else, and kind of just been invisible.
I was going to ask, have you done a lot of interviews? Have people asked to interview you before?
I've done a bunch this year.
Yeah, we've done more lately.
But yeah, mostly we do them together because we've been doing this together for so long.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, for me in this project, normally the only time I've made the exception to interview two people is when they are siblings. There's an odd number of siblings here in the game industry together. You're the first married couple that I've interviewed. Well, so I don't want to cut you off. Did you still have more?
Oh, well, that's how I ended up in the game industry. Is I kind of fell into it and fell in love with it, and weirdly kind of good at it. And that was a surprise. So, but I also work with my mentor, and I'm married to my mentor, which
that helps.
Yeah. When you're taught the game industry from Adam, it's like a very surreal experience.
Yeah, that's something I did want to ask about a little deeper, and sort of the vibe of mentorship in the game industry. But before we go deeper, I always like to ask sort of about ways people who know through experience, like how the game industry compares to other industries. The photography industry is not something I know much about. And I don't really want to fixate on a lot of the toxic culture of video games. I've done plenty of interviews about that. I feel like we can talk about other stuff as well, but I mean, do you see sort of similarities or similar problems even between the photography industry and the video game industry, whether it is, audience stuff or companies acting the way they do, or do you not see anything at all?
So I find the photography industry really interesting because it's very different now than it was when I was working in it. But back in because I mean, the digital photography industry specifically came out of very similar backgrounds of the computer industry. So a lot of the early adopters were people who like tech, and there's a stereotype of, those are guys who like tech. The labs are run by, guys who run servers. So it's especially the early digital photography industry, it was very male dominated. A lot of the photographers now are women, and that change just happened in the last decade. But a lot of the more technical back end is still very male dominated. So when I was working in the industry, there was one specifically a trade show that I went to that was wedding and portrait photography, and there was an even half, half were female, half were male, and a very different vibe at that show. But then when I went to the sports and event photographer, or the people who ran the big photography labs, those shows, very, very male dominated, and had a lot of the same discomfort of being a woman in that industry. All of the worst experiences I had having to go out and sort of schmooze people, or be a representative for my company, happened at the sports and event and the lab shows. Those are the ones where I came home and I was like, this icky, horrible thing happened, and how am I going to deal with this? And I was late 20s, 26 to 28 is when I was sort of doing this. Yeah. So I didn't have sort of my hard outer shell that I have now, which is I didn't have my witty comebacks or my straight up angry that was totally inappropriate. It was just
Right.
so, and that was even in the like game development, GDC or something like 7 years ago before the code of conduct, sort of these same icky things would happen. But it's become such like a great safe space, like especially the shows now, where like I don't have that horrible stuff happen all the time, and neither do for the most part, the rest of my female friends. Like they have a place to go if it does happen.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going to GDC, maybe 7-8 years ago, and on the back of the lanyard thing, I remember there being this like disclaimer that like, if you are harassed or if people are bothering you, the show is not at all. It's like they're absolving themselves if anything happens. Am I inventing that memory, or do you remember that as well?
To be perfectly honest, I only remember when Megan and Simon did the code of conduct, and I remember the next year how amazing it was. But like the weirdo, I don't remember the disclaimer, but I do remember like being followed to bathrooms and having to stop people from following me in. And
these are people ostensibly in the industry.
Yes. No, it was during Summit Talks even.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was in the Moscone Center. Or I remember Adam was once talking to somebody after a talk or something, and like a guy was there like asking me out because he knew Adam was busy that night and was inviting me back to his hotel room. This was all pre-code of conduct, because if it was after, they would have been booted right the hell out of the show. But like, it's just like the changes in the industry are so positive, and the industry events are so positive. I mean, we just did PAX, like PAX Prime. It's like,
right.
I've been terrified to do for years because of stories that I would hear afterwards. And our experience was amazing. Like, beautiful people, like, just being friendly and wonderful, and friends feeling safe. And like, that's a really, really cool change. I mean, there's all this other online horrible stuff happening, but like the trend is moving forward, and like conversations about it are happening. And that's really, really great. It's just like in all things, the boat is not turning as fast as we want it to.
Of course, but you're saying there's also been a change in the photography industry as well?
Well, so I left the industry just as the change was happening, but once you change the demographic of the people who are involved, a change has to happen.
Yeah, the pH balance shift.
Yeah. I mean, it just has to, so.
Well, so thanks for that. But speaking of changes, one of the reasons I did ask to talk to you together is this is something I feel like I don't really read too much about. It's not anything I know about personally, but this is a very broad question. But I mean, how has becoming parents sort of changed the way that you view and approach making games? Like Adam, I think you wrote a thing for Gama Sutra last year, but that was talking a lot more about time management. I'm curious more like, do you view the medium differently, or working in the industry differently, or has that changed anything for either of you, or nothing at all?
So I've seen like when we talk to people who game and are parents versus people who are design and are parents, that's a very different thing. If we were gamers and parents, I feel that our view would be very different. But when you're inside the industry and you're designing, you see you see the whole industry, and you see sort of the trends where the industry are going, and you see the constraints that, maybe making a violent game or playing a violent game if you're just a gamer isn't quite so strange than if you're making games and having a kid around, like, because you sort of see the marketing influences on the outside in a lot of ways. I mean, it sounds strange, but I find the conversations I have with gamer parents versus designer parents very different. And a lot of designer parents have the same rules and restrictions on our medium that we have versus gamer parents.
Are these similar to the restrictions that maybe you had growing up?
No, not at all. I didn't have any restrictions playing games growing up. The only restriction we had was don't you dare hook it up to the big TV. But other than that, it was just like, whatever, play whatever you want. Like,
I think I grew up in a similar household.
Yeah, Adam.
I had loads of restrictions.
Yeah.
They're different though. Like I feel like, I don't know, something that's on our mind a lot is, or that I think something that I think happens is like, because we make games, we know other game makers, like our knowledge of, like my parents were in a position where they, my dad worked in computers, but my parents didn't know anything about video games. They weren't enthusiasts, and we're like radically on the other end of the spectrum where we've passed all the way through game enthusiast into like arcane game scholars or something.
Yeah.
So like there's certain games where we don't care how much of it our kids play, basically, if they're having fun, because we can see how they work and we know how they're assembled and kind of what's going, like there's not a lot of superstition, I guess.
Yeah, we understand how our kids developmentally are reacting and responding to them.
Yeah.
So it's easy for us to sort of find these age-appropriate things that are meeting the need of what our kids are looking for. So, like, they're 3.5 and 5.5. So, I mean, there's no way we'd ever play, you know, some disgusting, like, bloody thing in front of them. Because the sound itself, like, we won't even play it if they're awake. Because the sound would terrify them. And like it's you know, developmentally inappropriate for our kids. But there are these other games where they don't actually play them right at all, but they wander around in them forever.
Yeah, I interviewed a teenager, 14, for my project last year, and she told me about how when she was like 7 or 8, she played GTA, but was just wandering around in it, and she hit the button she thought to talk to someone else, but of course it punched them, and it made her cry, and then she didn't play the game. She didn't get to play that game again ever.
Yeah.
And this is something do you know who Jesse Shell is?
Yeah.
I'm assuming you would. I interviewed him for this as well. He gave a talk about this. I forget where he was talking about giving his daughter a Hello Kitty game, I think for the Wii, and he got her set up, and then he got a phone call, and he went and was on his call, and then he heard his daughter crying, and he he saw his daughter crying because in this Hello Kitty game, you are, you know, attacking things and hitting stuff, and his daughter was very sternly saying, "Hello Kitty does not hurt."
It's a weird thing to think about, but like as an adult, you're just like, oh, this is funny or sarcastic. But the kids don't get that. Like,
yeah,
they don't understand. Like there's certain things that our kids play properly, sort of. Like our boys will sit and play Monument Valley for hours and hours, and they solve the puzzles, but there's no violence in the game at all. Like,
well, even if there is, like for a while we were playing Broforce,
yeah,
which is just like a constant like explosion. It's just basically, but it's so abstract, like that.
Right.
For them, it was just like a colorful, like stimulating thing. There was no concept that they were bad guys. Even like our kids didn't even have that word in their vocabulary at the time. But like as just a design thing. So even outside of like, I guess, I don't know, moral concerns or like parental concerns, like watching kids play games in like, not in a play test, but in like a low stress, just, you know, what do they
do?
Yeah, like how do they treat these things? It's been super interesting because they don't care about progress or winning at all. It's like completely irrelevant. It's not that they don't want to make progress or win or anything, but it's just like, it feels like 80% of most games that we put in front of them is just irrelevant to them.
Yeah, I mean, are you talking about like the Minecrafts of the world, or even
like Hohokum and Abzu?
Oh,
They'll
sure.
just wander around in these worlds forever.
Yeah, I actually think Hohokum is one of like the best 5 games made in the last like 10 years or something. Most people don't spend enough time with it to like
fully appreciate it. Yeah,
I sort of have to appreciate it, but
at this point,
holy smokes.
it feels like half of our life the last 2 years. Like watching our little ones experience Hohokam in a way that we would never ever consider experiencing. Like,
yeah, and then there's all these design decisions that stack up. You can play the game. It's a no button game. You can play with one thumbstick, right? And if you never quote unquote win or unlock something for like a young kid, that doesn't matter. Like the pleasure or the fun is coming from so many other directions, that all like the scaffolding you need as a grown up, all the like success simulator or like, you know, progress markers and stuff, they just don't matter. And it's so much like we're making a Steam game right now, and like that's taking over so much of the design. And there's like an age of kid where that's just, and they're playing like they're not like zombieing out or something. Like they're playing and exploring and doing experiments, and like they're doing most of the things that game players do. They just don't care about winning.
Well, this is something I wonder about, because I think there are still vestiges of this where there's still this attitude that video games wholesale are just for kids. And this is, you know, people who are not familiar with the culture. I mean, do you think the fact that we have a generation now of people who make video games raising people, do you think this is going to erode that notion? I mean, do you get sort of whiffs of how this may already be happening? That people don't think that anymore?
I think for our generation, absolutely. I mean, probably more like 3 years younger than us having kids. You know, somebody in their early 30s were like, or yeah, maybe late 20s, early 30s, where, you know, they weren't even close to being alive when they had the Atari. You know, they were maybe born around Super Nintendo. Like, so they had these more grown-up games in their early years, and now they're experiencing grown-up, like more grown-up games or a different way to approach playing a game as they're older. Like, there's still a lot of people, like my brothers, for example. So I'm one of 6, so I have a brother who's 10 years older than me, and games are definitely still for kids in his worldview. Like he's, you know, 45 or something this year. And even like the 3 brothers, so like the oldest, so number 1, 2, and 3, all have this like, games are for kids. But like my brother who's just older than me, so he's like 37, definitely understands that games are also for older people as well. Like games are not just a kid thing, and there's a rating system, for example. Like, but the 3 oldest for sure missed that. And I really think like, because we don't really remember a time when there were no games in the house. Like we grew up with the systems and have seen it progress from, you know, the Super Nintendo to the 3D environments with, you know, even shooting Nazis in oh gosh, I just blanked. Wolfenstein, yeah. Like, you know, when I played Wolfenstein, I was like, you know, 7th grade or something. When my brothers played it, they were in college, and like they were still like, here's this crappy kid game. So yeah, it's just
here's this baby game about shooting Nazis.
Yeah, it's just this generational, like, it's just a generational like scale. Like, you know, the idea that, you know, 30-year-olds having tattoos for my grandparents is like a really big deal. But for us, it's just like, well, whatever. It doesn't mean that you're, you know, an awful criminal or something. Like, it's just, yeah, you have a tattoo, who cares?
You're not a vagrant.
But for older generations, that's a big deal. It's the same thing with video games. Like, if you don't experience and learn it, like, you're not going to understand it.
Yeah. Well, Adam had said, I'm not sure, maybe it was you, in our emails, there's sort of this sense that something we're kind of losing in games is co-play or co-watching, or I think in the email it was called the Shrek model, where there's something in a game.
Yeah, so like this whole thing, like for me, like the games for kids thing is, it's a little bit problematic because like there's 2 things going on there, right? Like one is like this idea that the only kind of game that's okay to play as an adult is a quote-unquote serious game. you know, like a game that's about real important issues or something, or it's really exploring adult relationships. And like, I don't think that's super healthy. Like, as an adult, you should be able to, you know, enjoy things that are like, most media, they have this idea of, you know, all ages entertainment, and that should be an okay thing in video games too. But like, the thing that I see so much in, Frank Lance will make this as kind of a formalist argument from a totally different angle, but I feel like the example still basically works. And like, the way I end up feeling most of the time is, the problem with the game industry is we have stuff like Hohokum and Metamorphobet, which are amazing games for 3-year-olds, but also are really authentic and honest and are intellectually interesting as an adult. And then we have stuff like Call of Duty, which has like licensed firearms from actual like arms manufacturers who profit from like wars in third world countries, and those are mainly marketed to children.
Right.
And like, so there's some kind of like crossed wire thing where it's like, I feel like we have these games that actually are pretty serious and are pretty creepy, and those are mainly for kids. And then we have just this little, like, there's a little tiny slice of stuff on the outside that, regardless of how serious the content is actually like authentic enough and honest enough and doesn't condescend and doesn't pander. Like, that stuff feels like it's on the fringe for me. So like, in a lot of ways, I kind of feel like people saying that games are for kids, like, that's not a radically unjustified observation about a lot of the industry, but I think what they mean a lot of the time is that they wish there was more stuff like the video game equivalent of Bad Boys 2 or something.
Right.
When I think, like, the opposite, because, like, we think a lot of our company mission is kind of to make, we talk about this internally sometimes, but we have this notion of making games for grown-ups. But all that really means is, it doesn't mean making games that are all brown or that are about
grown-up topics,
decapitating things, or about divorce or something.
Yeah.
It just means, like,
it's not the literature equivalent of making games for adults.
Yeah, but like, as an adult, it might be thought-provoking. Like, there'd be a way of engaging with it that's somehow honest or something.
Almost like a movie equivalent.
I
mean, we use Shrek because...
Well, yeah, I use Shrek as like the negative, because that's sort of like two movies happening at once, as opposed to, you know, maybe like Studio Leica films or, I don't know. This still sounds kind of pretentious to me, but really it's just like...
No, it doesn't. Well, I think there's the
ability to make something where very different generations or demographics can engage with it and still find it
my favorite movie reference
valuable
is this old
engaging.
like 70s or 80s movie called The Stuntman.
Yeah.
And in The Stuntman, The Stuntman on the surface is basically an action movie. Like, there's this like hot blonde dude who's like, and it feels like it's going to be really serious, like Rambo, and then it turns out it's like this wacky action comedy about this guy who is not a movie stuntman, who gets into all these like wacky stuntman scenarios. So he's kind of like on the run from the cops after he trashes this guy's bar or something. And it is really genuinely funny and genuinely exciting and has great stunts on the surface level. And then down one level from that, you start to get a sense that, like, in some ways, this is like a lighter version of Apocalypse Now, and it's a little bit commentary on world matters. Just a little bit. There's like a little bit of that sprinkled around in there. And then you start to get a sense that another level down, that this is about... being a person in a world where not everything makes sense all the time, and how do you react to that in general? Like, how do you how do you handle all the things in your life that you can't control? And then you can start to get a sense that there's like another level under that. And that, I think, is, to me, that's like the greatest thing that you could do. Our friend Randy Smith, who's a game designer, has this idea. There's an old game design idea about for designers that's called depth first, accessibility later. So you plumb the depths of your design idea, and then you figure out how to make a good interface for it. And as a more reliable way of producing games than doing the opposite, making a cool tutorial and then trying to figure out what kind of game you're making. And it makes a lot of sense. But Randy pushed the idea a little farther to have this notion of depth on demand, where you try to build a game that implicitly or inherently somehow has layers. And the AAA games version of this is like you can decide to read the audio logs or listen to the audio logs or not. And I think the real design version of it is like you can play Tetris and zone out as a way to kill time, or you can play Tetris the way somebody else plays, like a Prokofiev concerto or something. Like you can dig deeper, and there is stuff to find there. And I feel like that movie, The Stuntman, is kind of the cinematic equivalent of that. Like, you can just have a fun time watching pretty people jump off of buildings. And it's like, that's a 100% valid way to watch that movie and appreciate that movie, because it's good. But then if you are curious or you are thoughtful and you kind of like poke around, there's other stuff going on. In that movie, the other stuff happens to be thematic. But you can watch like a Guillermo del Toro movie, which is just going to have a bunch of pretty people saying super dumb things out of their face, but everything's going to look really pretty, and you can just enjoy it on the surface as being really pretty. But if you interrogate the visual design, there will be layers there. There will be a bunch of little things about the character design and the environment design that are telling a whole bunch of a story that you weren't looking for originally. And it's not a twist. It's just depth on demand. It's
another way to interact with a thing that's been made. And
So are you saying that with a lot of video games or many video games, there's a lot more sort of rigidity where, I think movies, they have a concept that four quadrants, like you want to try to go for, like a PG-13 action movie where there's something in it for everyone. Like, are you saying you don't feel there's as much of that in video games?
I think it's almost that whole notion, I think, is almost completely absent.
I agree.
I think
I would agree also.
Yeah. And I don't know that it's good. I don't know that we want that to be. Do
you think it's eroded? Like, did it used to be there and it's gone away somehow? Like yesterday, very randomly, I saw a commercial for the Nintendo Game Boy from 1989, and it had this slogan in it, which was what was it? It says you. I have to look this up 1 second. I have it in another file.
Oh, no problem.
I have it. It says you don't stop playing because you get old, but you could get old if you stop playing, which is a weird arrangement of words. But in the commercial, it had like a businessman kicking back in his Game Boy having an awesome time, and I feel like that's not a commercial we would see anymore.
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of things happened. In the world of marketing, sales got very, very compartmentalized over the last 20 or 30 years, and that's a whole other trend where they just sort of decided, these products are for this demographic and we're only going to market to them. And I think it's mostly out of sheer laziness more than anything else.
There's no way that 15, 20 years later it would have negative effects.
Yeah, and I think it's a mix of laziness and some other things, but when the original Nintendo came out, so the Famicom in Japan and the Nintendo Entertainment System in the US a couple years later, one of the reasons that I think people have super fond memories of that game console if they were kids when it came out, especially sometimes even when they were adults when it came out. And a big part of that was you could buy the Nintendo and it had all these cool games, right, obviously. But the only reason it had all those cool games is Nintendo had an internal initiative. They said, we're going to make, we've had good luck with a couple of these arcade games. We want to make our own little software computer thing. And we're going to market it radically differently in Japan and the US. But, the through line here is we're just going to go through the company. We're going to make a few new hires, and we're going to just break off 2-person teams, and we're going to literally make a game in every genre.
Well, I'm sure you know what Famicom means, right?
Yeah.
Family computer. I'll say that just for the transcript. People aren't reading it, and then they're like, "Huh? Don't get it."
Yeah. So they actually had a thing. They had a list. They said, "Okay, it comes out next fall, and we're going to ship a fantasy adventure game, and we need like a science fiction action game. We need a car racing game. We need to get a couple of sports games. It'd be nice to get like maybe a couple of hybrid things in there, like maybe a racing action game, and then we need like a side scroller. That was a hot genre, and it was really like a very top down, salesy, marketing-y thing, but it was completely about producing like a broad range of things to do. And I feel like that's a really, like, no one would ever do that. Like, the PS4 didn't launch with like, okay, we need to make sure that everyone who's playing games, like, that the PS4 needs to launch with a really good match 3 game. And I think there are a lot more, it feels to me like there's a lot more lines and buckets and stuff than there used to be.
Yeah, I mean, it gets extra weird too, because I think like, I'm thinking of the Apple and Sony conferences recently, and it's weird to see Apple start to shift away from annual releases for all of its hardware as the video game industry is like starting to toy with that idea, with this assertion of like, hey, let's just do a half generation. Let's do that. I don't know. This is not that I sat and thought about it years and years ago, but this is not quite what I imagined the landscape of video games would look like today. Culturally, or as the corporate structure. It's been really interesting the way that it's sort of insulated itself and gotten really risk averse. So this is sort of an odd. So you have sons, right? You do not have a daughter?
Yeah, we have 2 boys.
Okay. So I'm curious if you've talked with maybe colleagues or friends who do have daughters. I mean, have there been conversations about like, is it ethical to encourage your daughter to work in the game industry?
So I need to preface this with, like, I'm a pretty hardcore feminist.
Sure.
I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I was Mormon on top of it. So with a very, like, headstrong, well-educated mom. So, like, there was no question I was going on to college, and if I wanted to work, go for it. And she didn't want to see me married before I was 25, which is, oftentimes in direct opposition to the religion and culture that I grew up in. But even with all of those, like, with somebody who was, like, backing me up 100%, I still, like, didn't take computers in high school. Yeah. Because, like, there was no way I was going into that class. And, like, I grew up with video games, and I, loved the heck out of my Super Nintendo, but I didn't have a game system after that because my brothers got too old. I never thought that the game system was for me. Mm-hmm. I went to all, like, the girls in science and mathematics things right up until high school. And then I stopped going to all of those things by choice. It wasn't that I wasn't invited, it was that I chose not to. And I didn't ever consider that computer science was a valid educational path for me, even though, like, I used to get hounded by the computer science teacher at my school to please, please, please take my class. You're the only student who's ever broken my labyrinth in, BS thing that he made in middle school. I mapped the whole thing. It went on forever. Like, I was the only person who found every single game he ever hid away. And even I let sort of society tell me that that wasn't valid for me. And I am now so much on the opposite end of it. Like, if you want to make games, like, yeah, there might be a lot of shots fired, basically. Like, your path might be harder, will definitely be harder, than, you know, a male kid. But do it. Like, the only way it's going to get better is if we encourage both of our kids, like our boys, to respect everyone, and our girls to just go for it.
I mean, we're all roughly the same age. I don't know what it was like for you growing up, but I remember as a kid, I remember friends of mine being like, "Oh, we're going to be the generation that's going to get rid of racism and sexism." Did you hear that too growing up?
Oh gosh, yeah. We're beyond.
We were high school ska kids, so like optimism about unity was
pretty high.
Prolific.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone. I guess we didn't do it. Well,
yet.
Not yet. I'm sorry. Yeah, I keep forgetting there's tomorrow.
Another interesting thing I want to bring up, just
yeah, please do.
We're raising boys, but we didn't necessarily start out doing this. But our views on play and gender are way more flexible than previous generations. Like, my boys don't have any color rules, because colors don't have gender. Like, if my kids want to play with a pink house, with their trains and their Legos in a princess dress, I don't really care. Like, it's play, and children are allowed to play. And I know that is not a universal thing. If my boys want to dance, they can dance. I'm cool with that. If they want to play soccer, I'm cool with that. Like, if they want to do more traditionally, quote unquote, male things, whatever. But like, it's not my job to define their masculinity or femininity. Like, it's fine. My job is to keep them safe and to guide them in a direction that they are safe and whole humans by the time they're adults, and that they respect people. And we don't have any strict gendered guidelines for that. Like, both of my boys dance, and they are so happy in their ballet and tap class, stomping around, acting like little tiny fools. And it's beautiful, and they dance together downstairs. Like, but they're also sitting at my, coffee table with their quote, ippy Legos, my 3-year-old ippy Legos, building like little cities and stuff. And like, currently my living room has like a 10 by like 15 foot wooden train track built. And downstairs we have giant like castles built out of blocks. But they also do art and garden and dance and sing along to Taylor Swift incessantly and annoyingly all day long. Like, and
all day
it's
long.
cool. It's totally fine. They're children, and if they respect like gendered play on both sides, like, could they respect gender, like the genders as they get older? Because it's not, oh, that's girly. Girls can't run. It's like, well, dude, she can probably kick your butt. Like, or maybe you are going to be stronger physically someday, but maybe not. Like, there's the difference between the sexes and the genders is not as far as people think. And like, we really believe that like we should be raising our kids to think that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to necessarily talk about this, but Adam had mentioned that he said it was weird in all caps, but he said that you're both pretty progressive-ish and modern-ish people, but you've still arrived at this situation where he does most of the computer work and you do most of the kids stuff.
It is weird.
You don't have to. I mean, you don't have to talk about that. You can if you want to.
It's more just straight. Like, in this case, it was biology. Like, we had babies and I nursed them, And there's a certain level of like, I have a baby attached to me for like 15 months that like, Adam can't get up at night and feed a baby because I have the food. I mean, and that like changes the dynamic of the relationship between your child and you a little bit when they're young. Less so with our older one because he's Kingsley. But with our younger one, I was almost a sole bringer of comfort. And we're just barely getting past that, and he's 3.5. But Adam can make more money. Like, his degree is in computer programming.
Yeah.
That's just like a fact of life. My degree's in communications. I did PR and marketing. Like, what do I top out at? Maybe $50,000 a year if I go get a real job. But like, Adam programs the games. Like, if we take an advertising client, I can manage that.
Right.
But Adam is actually producing it, like doing the actual button seat work. And like, that was just like when we crossed that bridge, like we knew from the beginning that, okay, well, Adam is going to be doing more work hours and I will take more of the child care. Even though I think technically Adam is more talented at it than I am. I was way more patient before I had children. And he is able to sort of take a step back and be like, this is not as serious or life draining or whatever that the problems with parenting are for me. But I can't program. Like, I could sit here and design Overland all day, but poorly, because I work with Adam. Like, we work together. But nothing would get done.
Yeah. Well, so this bridges to something else I wanted to ask about, which is to sort of move on from parenting literally. I wanted to ask a little bit about. I feel like there's been a sort of a rise of mentor types in the independent game scene, which is a very nebulous thing in and of itself. But I don't know if you've noticed this, but I think there's like a divide or a split between there's people who are being sincere as a mentor, and then there are people who are apparently altruistic but actually sort of have an agenda to be sort of self-promotional. I don't really want to name names or single anyone out, but I mean, have you seen this sort of distinction? Are you aware of people who are more sincere in their efforts as mentors versus those who sort of seize it as opportunities to self-promote?
I mean, I guess our experience so much has been that, like, I don't think anybody who we consider to be a mentor to us considers themselves to be a mentor to anyone. Like,
right.
It's not on their business card. It's not their business model. Like, so many, like, everyone who's in some way or other been a professional mentor to us over the years has really just been, it feels like people have the same goals as us. Because I think we end up serving as professional mentors to some other people too, which is just like, I'm doing my thing and I've been doing this for long enough that I understand that it's hard. And when I find other people who want to make it work, like, helping them is a way of like redeeming all of our like mega failures. Like, oh, I went through this terrible thing. Maybe we could intervene. Yeah. We could stop this person from having to do that particular mistake. And then that somehow, like, that lesson learned then, like, means more or sucks less or something.
Yeah. Yeah. If we can save others from all the horrible mistakes that we've made, like, it would lessen the sting of those mistakes.
Yeah, but so many of our relationships with other developers are a one or two way version of this, where if it's not us interceding and going like, whoa, we tried that before and it got gnarly. Just a heads up. I'm not telling you can't do it. Just it got gnarly. It's somebody doing exactly that for us.
And we really believe that, and we've talked a lot about this, a lot of times, especially indies, they work without those like anchor points. So they're not necessarily reaching out to somebody who has no skin in their particular game to like re-anchor themselves. Oftentimes we're like super passionate. We have to make this one thing, and nobody's necessarily grounding us in reality because we haven't reached out to anyone to help ground us in reality, to guide us so we don't have this really painful epic failure or something, or on the other side have this explosive, insane success that we weren't prepared for because we were so in our own tiny indie world that we didn't reach out for any kind of help going in either direction.
Yeah, I feel like I have this email thread with some developers. Like, it happens every once in a while where it's like, hey, my game is coming out in 2 weeks. What do I need to know about marketing?
Yeah. We answer this one a lot.
I'm not going to ask you to answer that.
Oh, man. We talk about it a lot. You would have to ask. You could look at any of our talks.
Mostly
ever.
The right answer to that question is, are you still friends with that guy you used to work for?
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
That's ominous.
We can't help you. You should have asked us 9 months ago.
Yeah.
Minimum.
At least, yeah.
But probably when you started the project.
At least.
Have this conversation.
Well, I'm curious because, you talk about things like, talks at GDC or Gama Sutra or whatever. Are there ways you feel that maybe this does feed into the survey that you circulated earlier? It was earlier this year, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It feels like 20 years ago now.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious.
That was in the spring.
Yeah.
On GDC.
Yeah.
Do you feel that there's a way that success stories in the game industry should shift? Because there's a lot of things just people don't know when they are going off of, prevailing wisdom or common sense or, well, this worked for so many other people before, but are there other things you wish people would be mindful of or that would sort of shift the template of success stories in the game industry?
I wish the successes would talk about everything that went wrong. Because behind every success is someone, especially all the ones at the top of my head right now, is someone who nearly died. They had crazy medical problems. They had family issues. They had all of these, they ran out of money. Somebody else fed them for 6 months. They had some, angel investor who just happened to be a friend who wanted the thing to exist come in and be like, hey, I've got your rent for the next 6 months. So many of them had somebody there to help, or what happened afterwards was a year of darkness.
So people who are hardworking and passionate, but the idea that they produce that game only through hard work and passion.
Yeah.
There's rarely mention of things like, a spouse supplementing income, or you moved back home, or you got a grant, or for some reason this is also like a weird dirty secret, I have a day job.
Yeah.
Or contract work. Contract work is super and we talk about it a lot because we always joke we'll never be in a indie video game movie because we are straight up boring when it comes to the financial planning of our company. Less so with Overland. We've done some crazy stuff with that, but
usually the more boring the better.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, I was Skype chatting with Adam before we started about the I don't even know if you call it a sequel. There's an indie game, the movie sort of sequel of things that didn't make it into the movie.
It's all the interviews and stuff they did before they even filmed Indie Game the movie.
There's some before and there's some after, and there's some stuff that I know that they just wound up cutting out, like Derek. But yeah, that's what Adam was telling me literally before was, so you guys are just too boring? Is that what it is?
No,
it's not a very dramatic story when you're and then what happened? Well, we spent 3 months, taking a client job that most people wouldn't find attractive and turning it into something that we were passionate about and that made a splash in the game industry. And then, that helped pay our bills and build up the war chest for future projects and investing in other people's companies.
And
like if you compare that to like, I was on the brink of death and eating chicken nuggets 3 meals a day just to make my dream live. Like,
we're not that. We're practical. Like, we're realists and we're practical, and like that's not a super sexy thing to talk about. Like on like a dramatic movie like sort of way, but like it's something we talk about all the time. Like, how are you going to make this game? Where is your income coming from? How are you going to eat? Where are you going to live? How have you made these choices and decisions?
These things like get expressed differently in different communities where like over the last few years we did a lot of we did a fair number of talks, and most of them have been more about the weird middle ground between creative work and running a small business. All of our talks are in this weird space, and but different communities in different parts of the world have different problems with this. So like the talk that I did at GDC last year is a talk that we've been giving in different forms for like 2 or 3 years now, and the version of it that I did at the Game Center at NYU was pretty different from the version that I gave in Buenos Aires, which like the principles were the same, but the focus and the fears or desires of those communities were so different. Where like at Game Center, there's this idea, and a lot of I feel like especially North American or U.S. indie game communities, there's this idea of, never compromise, follow your dream, make the weirdest game you can. As long as you like it and you worked hard, people are going to buy it on Steam. And
it's all framed in the American dream, like that.
Right.
The actual
it's a weird
legend in our country,
like hipster manifest destiny or something. And I mean that in and of itself is kind of a caricature, but we run into this all the time. Somebody confused us for being a publisher at some point, and so we've talked to like so many developers who are like, hey, I'm a year and a half into expanding my Game Jam game that got some good votes 2 years ago or whatever, and it's scary. Like that is a thing, but in Argentina, it was almost the opposite problem. It was, hey, we've got all these developers with 5 years of experience making super safe genre pieces with super smooth tutorials and completely unoriginal gameplay, and nobody's paying attention to them. And it's like, well, right, because they're just making really nice versions of stuff that people have seen before. So we talk about a lot of the same things in that community, and I feel like success stories tend to be about whether or not you made $1 million.
Right.
Yeah.
And for us, like the success story is like, did you walk the line? Did you break even on a game that did something new and that made people happy? Because that group of people is real small still. I'm not talking about this isn't like a socialist, I don't know what. Like this is a tiny group of people still. But I think people tend to feel like, oh, I barely made enough money to make my next game, and we weren't in the Steam top 10, and I don't have any sports cars yet. And it's like
I'm a failure.
It's like, man, no, like this is better than 95% of what everybody else gets to do. Like if you make something good and you don't lose money on it, like I mean, arguably, even just making something good is the
that's hard enough.
That's rare enough on its own. And if you can find a way to do that and not lose money on it, like I think that's amazing. And I mean, there are different ideas about this is where like a lot of our practice runs counter to some other practical business advice out there about, if you're not making back 10x your investment on your game, then the odds that you'll be able to reliably have enough time to produce another hit is going to be more difficult now. But, for us, we only put into our games what we have lying around for the most part. And so if the game makes back its money, we have enough money to make another game.
Well, so there's a few things going on here, and I think one of them is, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think in general, whether it's AAA or indie, sort of average costs of production are just going up. I think
high.
Obviously, it varies individually, but I was shocked because I gave a talk earlier this year out in Sweden, and I was just consulting with friends and looking up numbers, and I was just so surprised to learn how. I mean, I knew it was expensive for you guys, but just how much it has risen in the last few years. So I think part of the problem is like, is it even possible that we can shift to a model where people can perceive success in a model where if failure doesn't mean they have to completely shut down? You know what I mean?
Well, I think so much for us, basically, success is we don't have to shut down.
Yeah. We don't have to go get real jobs.
In my book, that would be success.
Yeah. And that sounds like such a downer, but I cannot understand how that could possibly be disappointing to anyone. It's like the awesomest thing.
I think because you don't have, like you were probably joking about the sports car, but you don't have a status symbol that you can, point to that other people can see. You have the knowledge that you can keep making what you want versus like it's discernible from the outside.
Yeah. Like I would say if I had, because before we were indie, I had a 40-hour-a-week job and I did side projects, and I felt like that was a pretty good setup.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that most days I'm working on cool games that haven't been made before that that I think are really special, that's amazing. If all we get out of the end of this, even if we do have to go get real jobs sometime next year, which right now I feel like is mostly unlikely, but we still have to grapple with the fact that that's a possibility. I might go teach a design class at the local school.
I mean, I think the reality, at least in North America, is not everyone, but a lot of people I know and a lot of people right on the periphery of my circles, there's this feeling that shit, I'm probably going to get fired soon, or shit, I'm probably going to have to get a job soon. There's a lot of tenuousness for a lot of people that I know. So I don't think that's unusual. Do you feel like it's more volatile since you've made the switch to being full-time doing what you're doing?
Weirdly, we have so much. We actually feel more secure being independent because we always know exactly when the money will run out. Right. So we know how much front time we have before that's going to be a possibility. And Adam and I have actually talked a lot about what if Night in the Woods and Overland both fail? What are sort of our options at that point? And how disappointed are we going to be with how much money that we've invested in these? And Adam, for a while, I thought he was just being Adam and sarcastic and giving me glib answers or whatever. He's like, no. He's like, I am totally okay. If Overland fails, I know that we batted for the fucking fence, excuse my language. We went as hard as we could on something that we were super passionate about. And no matter what, I'm going to be super proud of the thing that we've created. And if we have to get real jobs, I'm cool with that because we are creating something that is wonderful. And for my super realist
pragmatically,
brain,
part of this
that
project,
was really hard for me to come to terms with. How what are we going to do? And I'm like, wait a minute, this is Adam and me that we're talking about. We always find a way. It's just what we do.
And part of swinging for the fences isn't just putting in extra hours to make it more polished. Part of this is we used to work in mobile games, and we kind of knew what was going on there. We had like 3 top 10 games from our teeny tiny studio in like over the course of 5 years or something. So like we had and we didn't have any connections with Apple for the first 2 or anything. That was kind of a space that we understood, or it felt kind of reliable, but that was also when the bar for indie games was lower. And so now that the bar is higher, like a lot of the swinging for the fences thing is, we're going to make the biggest, most marketable game that we can stand to work on. Like Overland is the most mainstream idea that came through our like notebooks and stuff for, in years. That was the reason we decided to invest in it and decided to try to make a big deal out of it. And
yeah, I would agree. It's somewhat unusual from you guys.
Yeah, and so like if it doesn't work, this is, to me, that's just like, all right, this model. Yeah. Either my interests are just not mainstream enough, or somehow we're incapable of producing, of hitting the bar that is out there now.
Well, I think another confusing thing with this is, maybe this is because of the rise of social media and the internet in general. People believe very strongly what they believe, but I think what they forget is that what's typically true is audiences don't really know what they want until you give it to them. So I don't want to speak directly to this game or have you guys, respond with just that in mind, but I think that Dragon Cancer is sort of an interesting example of how it feels like someone somewhere is lying about what they really want. Like people say they want really personal games that explore the medium as an art form, but there's so many qualifiers on it that they're not saying, like, it has to be fun to watch other people play that game. It has to be longer than an arbitrary amount of time. It has to have multiplayer, and it shouldn't actually be artsy.
But you also have to look at this through the eyes of a different medium with similar personal reactions. So you can look at literature or movies. The stuff that wins Oscars, it doesn't make the kind of money that the summer blockbusters makes. How many people, how many adult women read YA as opposed to the stuff in the literature section? Like, people have a desire to experience quote literature or serious games, but like, how often do you want to experience something that may make your life feel harder? There's some, I love the serious games. Like, I love things that make me think and experience a different point of view, but I have a time and a place where I want to experience those. And some of them, like, I get partway through and I'm like, I can't do it. Like, this hits too close to home, or is too painful, or makes me feel too uncomfortable, and I can't do that right now. Maybe someday, but not right now. And that's my literature. Like, I read a lot, and my literature list is quite long, and I have to intersperse it with fantasy and sci-fi and YA and straight up children's books. Because there's some people who can mentally handle that all the time. And then some of us who just can't. And I think the majority of people, that's a hard thing to try to play all the time. If thematically, it's very serious. It's difficult.
Part of depth on demand, and even game designers like Richard Garfield will talk about this, about how I think as a game designer it's really easy to feel like, oh, I made this complicated, intricate, or heavy thing, and people just aren't getting into it, and that's because people are dumb and don't appreciate my genius. And on some level, that is kind of partly true, but the main thing that's going on is people have these big, full, insane lives full of stress and unpredictability and challenge and all sorts of things. And, entertainment serves a lot of different purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And a big part of Depth on Demand is having like a little bit of respect for people who have lives that are maybe harder than ours, which is almost everyone, even with our insane children and workload and everything. Like, we have a comfy house. We don't have to commute. We're not going to get fired.
We're not going to get pulled over because we have the
not
wrong
going to
skin
get
color.
arrested for no reason. Like, we have it pretty good.
Yeah, we're both well-educated, middle-class families.
Yeah.
Like, we're the epitome of privilege.
Yeah, so like, but for people who don't have that, or for people who do have that and are having a rough time, like, one of the ways that we kind of reconnected and became friends with some of the people who have been the most formative mentors for us, who aren't even in the game industry, was because when one of them was in labor, they were playing Cannonball. And they weren't getting any heavy, serious literary experience out of that. They were coping with stress and fear. And that's what a lot of people spend a lot of their day doing. And so, like...
This is true, yeah.
I mean, so on some level, I guess I feel like if you work in an entertainment industry, having some respect for and generosity toward the people who are going to patronize your studio is a good first step. And I don't think that means that you can't make serious games and that you can't make commercial games that talk about grown-up things. I mean, I think Kentucky Route Zero is a great example of a game that has some heavy stuff go down, but it is there's more than that. It's not just that. There's like you would I think in any movie about heavy stuff that reaches a big audience, there are production values. There's the way that the story is told, the way the story is presented and pitched. There's, I mean, the thing is this, like making games is an art or something like it, and selling games is a business. And I think that it's so easy to expect, because, I mean, the thing that we always tell people is like, listen, just because you worked hard on something beautiful doesn't mean that strangers are going to come throw money at you.
Right.
That doesn't work that's not the rule for anything else in the whole world. It would be super cool if that was the rule for video games, because like I could quit Twitter. Like, if all it takes is work hard on something you care about, like, oh my God, we would have so many sports cars.
We would have a village that we would just have indies live in. It'd be like a little,
But I mean, like
indie hostel in our cul-de-sac.
And there's different things. There are parallel, there are like parallel industries in free to play and stuff where I think you can brute force things a little more. But I mean, for us, it's like there's some kind of act of generosity that seems like it increases your chances of connecting with people, and whether that generosity is through art direction or soundscape or providing marketing. This is going to sound so smarmy, but like marketing around your thing that people find inherently valuable. Like our art director made these super cute T-shirts that are ostensibly promotion for our game, but like mostly it's just a super cute T-shirt, and that's the thing that adds value to people's lives. They put on their super cute T-shirt and they go to the coffee shop and the barista flirts with them because they're wearing our cute shirt.
Which has happened.
A lot.
Yeah.
But like that's
guarantee.
Yeah. We got to put stickers on there, like the Nintendo seal of quality stickers. Barista flirt seal of quality.